Hi, everybody. Welcome back. This is Fellowship of the Golden Age. And with me today, I have a familiar face, somebody you've seen before. This is Thoram. And today we're going to get to know Thoram individually rather than as a couple, because he's not a couple, he's Thoram. So, hey, Thoram, good to see you.
Hi, Neptune. Glad to be here.
Yay.
Excited.
Yeah, me too. I'm looking forward to just getting to know you some more and listening to how you're going to share during this interview. Like, who
Absolutely.
knows
Absolutely.
what will happen. Radio. So, as usual, we'll start off with your description of separate selves. So, could you give your description and also give some sort of an example, a practical
Yeah.
example of the separate self?
Yeah. So I've been thinking about that question, and a couple things that helped me to set a frame of reference with separate selves is recognizing two main things, and that is that by the very definition of separate self, that means it's something that's separate from us, and it's a self that we created. So one of the key things that's helped me to recognize what a separate self is, first to know that I'm not any of these thoughts or any of these selves that I have. Then who am I? So my first frame of reference is this pure awareness of being. What the masters have, coined the conscious you. So that's really important. Has been extremely important understanding for me in my life, knowing that I am more than all these thoughts, feelings, and emotions that I have, and that who I am is this ultimately this undefinable, pure awareness. And so when I look at something as a neutral place as a pure awareness, I can see that there's these thought processes, these thought matrices, these selves that I have that I created. And how I envision, I'm a very visual person, and so how I envision a separate self is I see it like a house. The metaphorical vision of a four-storied house. The bottom story could be the material body, the second story, the emotional body, the third, the mental, and the top of the story of the house is what we call, our identity body, our memory body, our deep subconscious. And so I have, recognized that inside all these floors are various people, beings. And I look at them as people in a crowded room sometimes. Sometimes my room is very crowded, and there's all these different selves in here. These are different personalities, different beings, things, different thought programs that respond to life based on their programming. And this programming is something I created, of course, at one point in time, created by life choices, either sometimes from trauma or how I learned about life or how I learned how to deal with life and how to survive in a world like this and this type of planet. And so for me, these separate selves are these programmed thought matrices, programmed reactions to life. And they're based upon memories, they're based upon experiences. And some of them reside in my outer mind, they're like kind of the shallow self. Some of them reside in my emotional body, mental, or even the deeper subconscious in my identity body. So I see them as these matrices that reside in my container, my mind. And this whole house is my mind, these different levels. And they reside in these different components. And so when I've recognized that these are actually something that I created in response to life, that I can have the chance to see them. And for me, one of the biggest things to be able to get power over this is to see them from a distance. So when I am in a reaction to something, when I'm in a separate self, I'm seeing the world through that self, through that filter. And so if I'm seeing it through something that I am threatened by, or something that's going to threaten my sense of self-worth, threaten my identity, who I think I am, or something of that, and I'm responding to it, I'm actually looking at the world through the filter of that separate self. So I'm seeing the impulses coming in, and they're being translated by that program of that separate self into my mind and my emotions and my thoughts. So when I identify with that particular personality aspect of separate self, I don't have any power over it because I'm taken over by it. I'm just in it, and I'm just reacting to it and feeling it. And generally, these separate selves, not all of them, but they're not very pleasant. There are separate selves that are supportive, and they actually help me support my journey. And then those eventually evolve into a next level. But when I'm in a reactive sense of separate self, that's a very painful place to be, because then I just can't think properly. I'm just thinking in the program of that self. And so my responses are limited. My choices that I see how to respond to life from that particular separate self is limited to the program of that matrix, either coming from a fear-based or coming from something that happened before and I don't want it to happen again, or you know what, I think it's this is going to happen to me. It was a painful experience, and so now I'm judging, or I'm being defensive. I'm blocking it. I'm coming from a defensive posture. My responses are built in from that separate self, and so that leads to a very either very conflicting experience, an unpleasant experience, non-growth experience, and sometimes just escalates the if it's a coming from between interaction between two people, it just basically spirals down. So when I've been able to take a look at it and recognize, this is a separate self, meaning this is a conscious programming from a memory or from a trauma of some type, and I can separate myself from it. Visually, I see it as if I'm pulling the self out, and now I can look at it from a distance. And so as soon as I can put a distance or a space or a gap between me and that reaction that I have, that separate self, I have power. And that's how I see them. Then okay, this is a separate self coming up. It's not really who I really am, but it's something that I took on, identified with, I created. And as soon as I can put distance to it, I can look at it, and then I can see it. I can see its fear, or its programming, or its reaction is coming from that particular self. Then, that's the next step. Once I recognize it and I can see that self and say, that's something that's coming from my subconscious, or coming from a belief, or just an emotional pattern, or a reaction to, all these separate selves have been created. I can begin to look at it and see, and then see it for what it is. Then begin to ask, well, why did I create it? What was behind the creation of that self? What was the belief that I had, or the emotion that I had? What's the energy around that self? And begin the process of unraveling it.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, that's a really thorough sort of description of the whole process of seeing and everything. So can you give an example of a separate self?
Yeah, I was thinking about that. And there's quite a few. I think one that comes to mind because it was a funny one that came up. And it was my epic drama self. And it's epic around relationships, which I have a lot of separate selves that apparently I'm working out about my relationships. But one of these was one that felt that when something was being threatened, or the relationship was being threatened, it felt like it was an epic event in my life, as if something catastrophic was going to happen. And it would strike me and would come into me, and I would feel adrenaline coming up in my body. I'd feel like, my world is going to be shifting and ending, and I had to respond in such a measured response to that, which brought me out of my sense of self, brought me into a very reactive self, put me on limit into my limbic part of my brain, and into fight flight, because it's like, it's threatening my very way of existence. It's epic. It's huge. And it was a fun moment, actually. I liked it. It was a moment with Urena and I was falling into this very epic self, and I had recognized a moment that we were having kind of like a deep discussion, and it was getting very intense, and I just had to leave the room. Like, I just couldn't take it. Oh my God, I gotta go, and I left the room. Then finally, a few minutes later, I came back. She was looking at me like, like what's going on with you? Why is this so huge for you? And she said something in there like, this is like an epic drama you're in, and it broke it. And I started laughing, and I'm like, oh my God, you're right. So as soon as he did it, it broke this such a, it was so intense. Oh my God, what's going on? And all of a sudden I broke it. I went, oh my God, that's hilarious. That's so funny.
Yeah.
And I saw it for what it is, and that was huge for me. And it's not that, and I reflect now that it allowed me to crack that reaction and get out of it. Now I'm still moving through pieces of that over time, because they're tied to other separate selves. As you have, there's a bunch of them. A lot of times I feel like I have in my room, I'll have 2 or 3 of them all hanging out, and they're all kind of ganging each other, and like communicating to the next one, be afraid of this, because of that. And so there's usually more than one involved in it. And so that was an example of this epic self of mine.
Yeah, yeah.
You know,
And
it's
that's
epic.
I describe that one, that drama, that epic self, like it's almost like an addiction too, like because we're in this world with, that just has so much drama going all the time. And I remember I hit the point where eventually I realized I have to select out drama for my life. Like, like it's just something
Yeah.
that's this pattern of addiction, even in the body, like, the adrenals are releasing, we get used to this
Oh yeah.
release
Yeah.
of cortisol and
Yeah.
adrenaline. Like,
Hmm.
yeah,
Yeah. And my even as we're growing along, even most recently, as these certain selves come up, I have one that's um, in a sense protective because it feels like, well, one of mine, the biggest one for me, is the self that thinks it's responsible for another person's state of mind or the state of being.
yeah,
And I had taken that on a long time ago because I felt responsible for how I responded and reacted to life. And so I created a self that's, oh gosh, I did this to somebody. I'm responsible for how they're reacting to me. I'm responsible for how they're receiving me or their state of mind. And that's a tough one because you're not. But it makes one respond in a very imbalanced way because then you're not responding from your true nature, responding to how they are, and you're trying to fix them or trying to do something different. And it's
yeah,
not a very powerful place to be, for
yeah.
sure.
And that one is quite complex because it's got a whole bunch of other ones packed in with it. Like I've had to deal with that too, and it's not just that on its own. Like, there's this doubt in yourself that comes with that, and there's all these different layers.
Yeah,
It's a tricky one to wedge out and to
yeah, yeah,
resolve.
yeah. It
Yeah,
reminds me, the story of I think Saint Germain was saying that in his process of moving towards the ascension in his last lifetime, he what did he say? Something like he achieved the ascension through a million right choices, a million correct choices. He said something like that, which basically, in my term, is like transcending a million separate selves. I mean, if you
yeah,
want to put a lot to it, but basically recreating and making new choices along the way. And I always kept in my mind that we are constantly recreating and making new choices, and that's transcending to the next level each time we do that.
yeah, yeah. And it's kind of tricky too because I find it best to sort of focus on one, and I become aware that there are others there, but I just sort of keep my focus on the one. And
Yeah.
sometimes those other ones, they just drop away with it, or sometimes eventually I have to bring the focus to another one and let that one go. But yeah, it's a real balancing act.
Yeah, it really is. And I certainly have sensed ones that exist in different parts of our consciousness. So, as we call our, that things that exist mostly in one's emotional realm or the mental or identity realm. For me, in my journey, it's been a lot about the emotional realm, getting more comfortable about these different emotions that I've had from in this lifetime and from previous lifetimes that were so painful and were wrapped around by my self-judgment that I was not able to really reach them and release them. So they were just carried over in my emotional body. And it caused me to trigger, caused me to react in certain ways because it's a pain, it hits that pain body. And then I start expressing from that or from a fear, I'm afraid of experiencing that pain again, or I'm afraid of losing love, or I'm afraid of being seen as not worthy of love.
Mm.
And so, those come from, and so when I recognize those, those are ones that I begin that are up, that are need work and to transcend and
Yeah.
heal.
So this might be a good point to you've got quite a unique story that you experienced a lifetime with Jesus, a very unique story, and so I'd just like to hand it over to you. I really want to hear your story and
Sure.
to share that. So
Um, this happened. This was an event that happened back in, I want to say, somewhere around 89, 1990. I was in doing workshops with my mother, with a woman named Laura Laura Reuter. She was doing these weekend retreats called One Moment in Time, and this retreats to help you with addictions and getting over different life traumas, or different traumas in our life, to relationships, to personal things, and so on. It was a very transformative weekend that we did. But one of the things that Laura was really good at is she did past life regressions.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was really intrigued with that, because I was really doing a lot of spiritual searching at the time. And so I set up a session with her, and she took me to her place. It was a beautiful, kind of like an inner home, like this pyramid set up with a very comfortable, bedding inside with lights and crystals. It's very cool. And you lay down, and she would put me into a meditative space and guide me in a guided meditation to whatever past lives that would come up. Totally free-flowing guidance. And I went through a couple lifetimes, and then one came to me as we were just going through the process, that I saw myself during the Roman times. And the images came very clearly, sandaled feet, the leather thongs, the leather strappings, and I can see my garb, and I can see myself very clearly as a centurion,
Mm-hmm.
a Roman centurion. And that's all fine. I'm like, okay, that's interesting. And she said, well, look around and see where you are. And as I looked around in the visual, and this vision's coming towards me, I saw this mound, and I saw people around, and I saw these crosses on the ground. And then the next moment I saw something, and it took me, and I couldn't speak for a few minutes, for at least quite a few minutes, because the image was shocking, and it was so emotional. I was like, what? What am I seeing? And my voice started cracking, and I started tearing, and what I saw is this image came, and I saw a hand, and I saw a nail, and I saw my hand with a hammer nailing down this man's right hand on the cross. And I realized as I looked, that it was the body of Jesus, and Jesus was on the cross, and I was nailing his hand. So emotional for me, his hand on the cross.
Yeah.
And as I was doing this, and as I was putting this nail through this man's hand, this beautiful man's hand, I looked over, and I looked at him, and he looked at me, and his eyes were, in my memory, was this beautiful blue eyes. I was struck by the unconditional love that was coming from him. He looked at me and saw me to my very soul and loved me. And here I am, this Roman centurion, nailing this man's hand to the cross, and he's loving me, like completely loving me, unconditionally. And it was like, it just shocked me. Like, how could this man, here we are crucifying him, and he's loving me? And it just struck my soul profoundly. And I remember the rest, after that, in that lifetime, I struggled, with who I thought I was, and who I judged myself so heavily to be, in this self-judgment, and here was this man I met and just saw, and he loved me so conditionally, so beautifully, that it changed my entire track in life. And it felt for me from that point on, where it shifted me to a frame of reference that it took a long time, lifetimes, to really integrate, to that there is such a thing called unconditional love, true unconditional love. And yeah, it was a very powerful experience, and inside the journey, she spoke to me about, knowing, unconditional, the forgiveness and so on, and I cried, and I forgave myself for having, done that. Yet on the other side of that was this beautiful moment of experience that I was blessed with, and blessed seeing him that way, him seeing me, and I felt connected to him ever since, deeply and profoundly. from that experience. Mm-hmm.
Wow.
So it was very profound. Um, inside that moment, it's also after that lifetime, and I was speaking to her, to Laura. It came to me just so powerfully that I said, I am going to ascend this lifetime. I'm going to ascend this lifetime. And at the time, I really did not know, not that I know now, the fullness of what that means, but it just came to me like from my soul, from my being. And it was a very, very powerful experience.
Wow. Oh, thank you. Like, yeah, it's really like touched me too. Like, and like someone had to do that. Someone had to put those nails in, and you were that man and at that time, and I thank you for playing that role. But what a beautiful experience to be there in the presence of unconditional love, the Christ loving you fully. Yeah.
I could still, I mean, what is it, 2,000 years later, how many lifetimes? But that's like nothing in time to that memory and the feeling of seeing that and being seen, you know, by this man, by Jesus, through the Christ that moved through him. It was profound, profound.
Yeah, and I bet you any money that there's going to be a lot more people sort of feeling that too, the same feeling. So
Yeah,
thank you for sharing.
sure.
Okay, big breath. And now,
Yeah.
would you now just share with us your story from this lifetime, like your spiritual journey,
hmm
whatever you'd like to share.
yeah, absolutely. My journey started back when I was 10, 11, 12 years old. And I was fortunate at the time. I was living in St. Croix. And so we were born in West Palm Beach. Our family moved to Puerto Rico for about a year. My sister was born there. I have an older brother and younger sister. And we moved to St. Croix in the Virgin Islands. And my mom was into what was called Silva mind control. It was really meditation, not mind controlling people, but controlling your own mind. And using little biofeedback devices that my mom introduced me to, and we would do these meditations, and I would put my fingers on this little device, it would go beep, 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 and then the slower the beep, the more meditative you were. And she had found some books she thought I was interested in, and they were by this man named T. Lobsang Rampa, a Tibetan monk in Tibet, in Lhasa, Tibet, and he wrote many books. The first one called The Third Eye, and then many other books after that. And he was a Tibetan monk that lived in the early 1900s and then escaped while at the time that China came in and invaded Tibet. He was in the Potala, which is the capital to Tibet in Lhasa. The beautiful golden gilded Potala, which is a huge building and so on where they were. And he wrote many books about his life and about the chakras and about astral traveling and about auric seeing and healing and all that and his own experiences. I was enthralled by that. I read just about all of his books, and I even wrote to him 2 letters. When I was young, when I was like 11, 12, 13 years old. He wrote back actually. He actually wrote back.
Yeah.
It was very cool. And I was intrigued with astral traveling. I was just thought that was like amazing. I wanted to travel and get out of my body and go astral traveling and so on. And it was quite the fantasy of mine to be able to do that. Of course, when I wrote to him, he said, well, you're young yet. You're only 12 years old. Give it time. Because I was so excited to want to do that. But that started me on the journey. Really exposed me to to something so much more. Before then, I was just exposed to. My mom came from a Roman Catholic religion, and I went to St. Mary's School, which is a Catholic school there in St. Croix, and of course they had the religion studies. But the books I read, I automatically knew so much of it wasn't true. Just things like you're born in sin from Adam and Eve, and then Jesus is the only Son of God. I'm like, he's not the only son. There's things I just intuitively knew that were just totally off base. And so when I started reading Lobsang Rampa, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is just food for my soul. And so that started me on the journey. Later on, when we moved from Virgin Islands to Florida, I had gotten into crystals and reading about trance channelers, and so I experienced some trance channelers at the time. Some were very helpful for me. They were not ascended masters, but they were benign beings that really helped me to get back in touch with myself and my spirituality, and to who I am, and back in touch with my body. They were later on. I got into A Course in Miracles, which was really powerful for me. I was in college, and I read the whole book and did the whole workbook, as you may know, 365 lessons. It took me a year and a half. That really started me on the journey of looking and questioning what my mind saw and what we see and how we interpret things, and how we put meaning on everything we see. It was not until, I think, in the 90s that I came across in a bookstore these green books, the greenback books, the Magic Presence, and the ones from Saint Germain, and by Guy Ballard, Godfrey Ray King. I found those books and I was enthralled. I mean, I just devoured them. And I felt this familiarity with Saint Germain, and I was like a sponge. I just soaked up I read many of those books at the time. Started doing some of the decrees in the early 90s, and that created a seed in me that stayed with me, because for years I got really involved in a spiritual group that got into very much a cult mentality that I had to really move through, and that's a whole nother story into its own self. But that teaching from the masters in the early 90s stayed with me in the 89-90 period of time. Right around 2000 or so, I found the books again in 2000, 2001 at a bookstore from our children's hermitage, which was a homeschooling. I'm like, I remember these books, and I reread them again, and I went through the whole series, and I went, even back to Madame Blavatsky stuff in the previous dispensation. Sorry, my lights are going on, and I just read all those, the Theosophical Society, then I read books of the Bridge to Freedom, and the different, following the different messengers, and then that really got me on the track. Some of the Lighthouse and other Zen Master teachings, I just devoured so many of those books and found them. So that really put me back on the track, and I was doing a number of the decrees at the time. In my journey, I did connect with. I was looking for in early 2001 or two. Like, there's got to be some messengers now. Elizabeth Clare Prophet's not a messenger anymore. She had had given her mantle up and it shifted, and there must be somebody else. So I Googled around and I found the Temple of the Presence at the time, which was over in Tucson, Arizona. And I felt there was something there for me. So I went there and I started working with their decree books, and I actually went there about 2 or 3 times. And it was truly transformative for me. It was the next step, next movement in my evolution. I got into understanding the power of the rolling decrees, the power of the decree momentum, and the power of the spoken word. Really engaged in going with a group of people and feeling that spiritual energy was very powerful for me. Very, very powerful. I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to put my lights on. I think I'm getting really dark here. Let's see if that works better. And
Yep.
so, yeah. And I did that for a little while, but I can feel the energy was not quite where I wanted to be yet. I grew past that very quickly. And in 2004, I found I was searching again, and I found Kim Michael's website, Ask Real Jesus. And I have to say, when I read his website, I read Jesus' dictation, it was like, oh my gosh. It felt so personal, so here, so practical, so in my life. Like, I can apply this. I can apply this here. It wasn't so cosmically out there. And it was beautiful. And I moved back and forth and reading his stuff and then moving it. And then finally, by the next couple of years, I started doing his rosaries and just found them transformative. And I'm like, wow, these rosaries are different. They're actually pointing to my psychology. The other rosaries we did was like, calling for spiritual light, and spiritual divine fire in different ways, but it was calling in spiritual light. But these were pointing to psychology, pointing to, these aspects of my ego. And like, I have to speak these out loud. I have to speak this ego tendency out loud. Oh my gosh, what's happening? And I found out by speaking them out loud, I can see them. I can transform them. I have power over it because now it's been shown when I have those. And so that's been my journey ever since then, with Kim Michaels. And when going to a number of his seminars and doing many different decree vigils and over the years, all the way up to present time.
Wow. Yeah, I like how you pointed out, like, the value of these current teachings, that obviously that's what appeals to us, is that it's focusing on psychology. Like, like for me, as I read the teachings and do the invocations, I just feel like I'm reprogramming my mind to think correctly. We don't realize how incorrectly we've been thinking until we start acquainting ourselves with correct thinking, I guess, is the word.
Yeah. And along the way, there's been some spiritual experiences that have really touched me. It gives, we call things like the frame of reference. When we have something that we experience outside of our life that's a frame of reference that's not in our normal everyday waking life, and these spiritual experiences have been like that for me. I had a few of them that were just really, really profound. One of them was, I guess the one that comes to mind is, I was at a Kim Michaels conference in California, and I was sitting in the audience before a dictation was going to happen, and I happened to be in a very just peaceful place, watching everybody moving around, getting settled, and I was just in this really quiet, loving, peaceful place, just observing, and I was just sitting there, and then all of a sudden, I felt this presence come in, and this presence came into my mind, and it was as if the universe came into my mind. It was like this. It was like as if there was a distinct personality consciousness that was vast as the universe and as intelligent as the universe, meaning unlimited, just beautiful. And the frequency was this, almost like this pure sine wave, just this pure wave, not a single jaggedness to it. It was a pure wave and it was deeply personal, and a personality behind it that was just unlimited and vast and beautiful, and just like this personality, this being was just saying hi. It just said hi inside me. And the next moment, Kim sat down, and then was Archangel Michael coming through. And I'm like, oh my God. And so it was a profound experience, profound.
Wow.
Feel that, and ever since then, I've always seen that who Descended Masters are so, as you well know, so far beyond anything that we can imagine them to be in our minds, in our limited imagination in minds. They are amazingly beautiful, vast, personal, supremely intelligent, and unlimited in nature. And it was a very profound moment to experience that. And so that's stayed with me as a cool measurement.
Beyond our lower mind to perceive of that. Like, I've read it and I feel it and sense it, but knowing that that's what we are becoming too, wow.
Yeah. It was awesome experience. Yeah.
And so you said you had a couple of experiences.
Yeah, there was another one. Yeah, this one happened. It was a moment that I was in bed and I was just relaxing, and I was in a very, again, it's that time when you're really relaxed, as always, when your mind just gets quiet, and all the monkey thoughts kind of quieted down, and I happened to be sitting, laying there, and I started thinking, I just spontaneously like, so who am I? Who's watching? And so I just go, who's watching me? Who's seeing me? And just going like in, and who's seeing me? Who is here? Who is watching? Who's observing who? And it was just this perfect question. And all of a sudden, I got quiet, and I felt this amazingly presence of me watching me. Me, this me, intimately, personally, deeply watching me. Full love, full presence, full and so real. It made everything around me seem unreal. It was so real. Everything outside of my mind and my body, my room, felt comparatively unreal compared to this me watching me. And it was profound. And it was my presence there watching me watching me. It was very deeply moving. And if the feeling was like, I like this presence, my own presence, like I am intimately with you, I know all of you, and I love you deeply, fully, completely, and I am here always with you, always there, always present, and I am inside you. I am you, and it was a very profound moment. Profound moment.
And do you find, like, the further you move through life that you were becoming more naturally one with you? Like,
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. What it created in these moments was this inside me, this I would say, this rock of centeredness that's within me that has always stayed with me, of knowing that I am beyond form and that I'm living in a continuity of eternity. And so when I see it now, I see myself on this continuous flow of eternity in this life as consciousness. And so there's a real sense of continuity, a sense that I am eternal in consciousness, and it has deeply affected me in how I see myself in this world, and it stays with me, and it's been my anchor. This sense of self that's beyond form, beyond time, that's this continuity of consciousness, and that's been very, very beautiful for me. And I don't always remember that. I mean, reality is as we well know, I get into my separate selves, and we have, trauma and moves. So I definitely have moments where I'm like really experiencing my emotions. But those are storms that do pass. And I had in my storm that passed recently, I'm always find my center is there again once my storm passes. And I feel that. And that's been a blessing, a deep blessing for me. One of the things that just Zen Master teachings have really gifted me is a sense that when I was growing up in the teens, I felt very alone. I felt isolated because I did not relate. I was very much a classic avatar in the sense I could not relate with many people. I thought differently. I did not relate to the social consciousness, especially in high school growing up. I was so not that type of person. And for a good part of me, I felt very alone. I had this real thing about aloneness and feeling lonely carrying on through me in my life. Even I felt it one time. Even when I was at the Temple of the Presence, I was there. I was watching people, and I felt I'm still alone. Time went on as I was doing the rosaries and decrees, especially with Kim Michaels. Something shifted, and that I felt that. I guess I had to say that the personal feeling of the Zen masters within my being and my own presence clicked. It clicked. I can't say it was exactly this day or this moment, but over time I realized I don't feel that anymore. Over the years, I look back and like it's gone. I don't feel that anymore. I feel like this oneness. I feel the connection to life, connection to nature, connection to the presence of life. So when I center myself, I don't feel alone at all, ever.
Yeah, that's such a key stepping into point, like because I felt exactly the same. I just felt alone all of the time, and then there just comes this point when you realize you're not alone, like, and you never were alone. And
Yeah, right.
yeah,
Totally,
yeah,
totally. Yeah, it's beautiful.
yeah. So And so that, what it is that keeps us away from feeling like, we're one with the masters. Like, probably the biggest one is that primal self that we first created when we first came here. And would you be able to take just a few moments to talk about like where you're at and seeing your primal self?
Yeah, it's certainly been, the proverbial onion that's slowly being peeled, and I was looking at it. But I do believe in my primal self showed up in the sense that how I responded to the world when my first incarnation. Um, so I have seen some people where the response has been judging the world, like what did the world do to me? Mine was so much as what did I do to the world in my response? And so my primal self is built upon a number of things. One is this created from the self-judgment of how I responded to the world. So I've carried this self-judgment self around ever since then. There is a very strong feeling from that primal self about that my light, my love was rejected. And so, there's a strong internal feeling of that my love will be rejected by life or by other people. And that's what I feel that I experienced in that first lifetime. I also came across that I was put in a situation where I was put in a catch-22 between another person, that whatever I did would end up with the loss of that person's life or something worse. And it's a classic thing about the fallen beings that put you with your state of consciousness at that time in a very dualistic framework that you feel like you're damned if you do and damned if you don't.
Yep.
And in those situations, I didn't realize that the consciousness that I had at that time in that lifetime, where I was, they broke my mind. They fractured my mind, my soul, my sense of identity, because of how I was presented with something. Because in my heart, I could never want to harm anybody, but I was given a situation. It seemed like harm would come about no matter what I did.
Yeah.
And it fractured me. And so that made me open to this programming that I'm not worthy of love. I'm not, my light's not worthier. I'm not supposed to be here. You should not be here on this planet. And those are very deep programmings that were put into that lifetime. And because of how that was laid in previous lifetimes afterwards, and how the consciousness I had at the time responded to life was very amenable to self-judgment. And so that's been something that's been carrying me. And as I kind of look further back to that lifetime, is releasing this self-judgment of me, of who I was and what I did. And that's been very huge for me to unravel.
Yeah.
So far.
Yeah. That's all really relatable, and I certainly relate to that sense that I'm responsible for other people's feelings or for what happens in the world, and just bit by bit been cutting away that sense of responsibility, like seeing it and seeing the ridiculousness of it, like I can't control.
You can't do it. No, exactly. There's a lifetime that comes to mind that was part of my journey, and I was with one of these trance channelers before Kim Michaels in the early 90s that really connected to help me realize, to help me see certain things that I need to see when I was younger. This is when I was my early, I don't know, maybe 30s, 26 maybe, something like that. And there was a lifetime they said that I was with a student underneath a magi, like Merlin, like a Merlin. Merlin was actually a title, and I was studying under this very advanced Merlin, truly like probably a very advanced being, and I was studying under him, and I was a little bit young, getting this information, probably not quite ready for it, and I did something where I misused it. I was young, and I did something wrong, and I misused it, and I caused him to a lot of pain and suffering, because the town folks got really, really pissed off. Where we were, this was in England or somewhere, and caused a lot of grief for him. And it was not a wise thing for. I don't know exactly what I did, but something that was pretty uncalled for, let's say, and not a good choice. And when I was told about this, they were saying that this master had moved on, had totally forgiven me, has moved on, but you haven't. And the thing that I kept judging myself, lack of forgiving myself for what I had caused for this the master that I was studying with that I love so much. And it was a very important lesson for me that I have the psychology, the tendency in my psychology to hold on to my own misgivings, things that I've done. I can forgive others so much easier than forgiving myself.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And that's been my particular psychology that I'm having to work with. And that what really told me about my particular way of being and how to really look forward to that compassionate forgiveness of self. And that's been a very important part of my journey.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. I know, like I had an experience a few years ago when I just had the weight of everything I hadn't forgiven myself for. Like, and just this one night, I could see every single thing I'd done where I just couldn't forgive myself. And I remember, like, I just had this moment, a vision where I just was bowing down before God, and I'm assuming it was masters, I don't know, but and I was begging for forgiveness, and I'm prostrate on the floor. And then all of a sudden it was like I was just sucked out of my body, and I was in the position of God and looking at myself on the floor, and I felt nothing but unconditional forgiveness.
Right.
And it was like, there's nothing to be forgiven for, like, and right. It just gave me this perspective, and I realized, just let it go. Like, it's just ridiculous.
Yeah, absolutely, completely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, Thoram, our time has come to an end, but I just want to thank you so much. This has been a magnificent journey. Like, thank you for taking us all along here.
Absolutely. I enjoyed it very much.
Excellent. All right. Okay. See you guys. Bye.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.